Hello everyone. In today's video, I want to talk to you about why going on a cruise or traveling internationally during the pandemic may be too risky and totally unaffordable. Okay, I've talked a lot about traveling during the pandemic in my videos since the beginning of the pandemic, and I have a whole playlist on both pandemic travel and a playlist on what it's like to travel with a mask. So if you're interested in those, you can check those out on my channel. I'll link one of those playlists at the end of this video as well. But something I've also alluded to in several of my videos that has been a major factor for my family personally, for me and my kids, that goes beyond the health risk aspect of traveling during the pandemic. We've done plenty of traveling during the pandemic. We're very cautious. We're very good about wearing our masks. We're very careful about being around crowds and things like that. And we have managed to successfully take a good number of trips during the pandemic and not contract the virus. So it is possible to do that. But there's another aspect of traveling during the pandemic that is, I believe, just as, if not even more risky than the risk of contracting the virus and getting sick. And that is a financial risk related to traveling during the pandemic. And what I'm specifically talking about is if you test positive, you could lose out on a lot of money, or you could be forced to spend a lot of money that you were not planning on spending. And I'm going to give you a few different scenarios to kind of explain in detail what I mean. And I think this is something that a lot of people have not thought about. And that's why I wanted to make this video, because the goal of my channel is really to help you be a successful traveler and to be able to travel well and enjoy your travels for as little money and with as little stress as possible, especially when you're traveling as a family with kids. Okay, I'm going to talk about 4 different scenarios where you or someone in your family or traveling party might test positive for the virus and how it would affect each of those trips. The first 3 I'm going to say are related to taking a cruise, okay? So if you take a cruise on certain cruise lines, for example, Princess Cruise Lines or Carnival Cruise Lines or Royal Caribbean, those cruise lines are requiring you to test for the virus at your own expense before you get to the cruise port. And you have to do it within 2 or 3 days beforehand. Tony from Lolita Loca made a really good video showing and demonstrating the process of him testing himself at home with a kit that you can order that Royal Caribbean specifically gives you as an option on their website. And I'm going to link Tony's video up here to show that process of testing yourself at home. You have to do a proctored test where someone is supervising you giving yourself the test. There's other kinds of rapid at-home tests that are not accepted for travel, and they're not accepted by those cruise lines. So you have to be careful that you're using the right kind of test. But let's say that's what you're doing. You're going on a cruise in a few days. You're flying tomorrow, and so today you're packing and everything at home, and you're like, okay, we have to have our negative COVID tests, and we need to all test ourselves at home. So you do your tests at home. Hopefully you're all negative, but let's say one or more of you does test positive. So what does that mean? Now, you've tested positive before you got to the ship. So technically, the cruise line isn't responsible for you. There's a couple possibilities here. It's really going to depend on the cruise line and what, if any, travel insurance you have. Now, I'm going to say right up front, not having travel insurance during the pandemic is a really bad idea. Not having travel insurance for a cruise or for any kind of international travel is a bad idea anytime. I always recommend it. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether or not it's better to get the travel insurance for a cruise through the cruise line itself or on your own independently. Many of us will recommend getting it independently, and I still stand by that in normal times when it's not a pandemic, because you're always going to be able to find more comprehensive and much less expensive travel insurance for a cruise through another travel insurance company on your own. I like to use insuremytrip.com. They let you compare travel insurance quotes. And I have gotten travel insurance through them through TravelX or Alliance with a Z for much, much cheaper than what the cruise lines charge for travel insurance. However, during the pandemic, I actually think it's in many cases better to buy the insurance through the cruise line directly when you book your cruise. And the reason I say that is because if you buy the travel insurance directly through the cruise line, they are going to make sure you're covered for COVID. Something people don't realize, and I know this because my dad was an insurance agent for over 50 years. Most travel insurance does not cover pandemics. So you might think you're buying this great travel insurance policy, and then what you need it to pay for is something related to you contracting COVID, and none of that's going to be covered. Going back to our scenario, you're at home, you're testing at home. Somebody tested positive. You can't go on your cruise. They're not going to let you on the ship because you have that positive test. Now, I would recommend it might be a good idea to take a second test just because there are false positives sometimes, but that's just kind of a side note. Okay, but let's say somebody actually is positive. Now you have the situation of you paid for everything already. You've paid for your whole cruise. You may have prepaid gratuities. You may have paid for a pre-night cruise hotel. Well, maybe not. You probably would have paid for that when you get there, but sometimes you prepay for a hotel. You maybe have paid for transportation to the cruise port. If you're like us and you live far, far away from where the cruise ships are, you've paid for a flight to go to Florida or wherever the cruise ship is leaving from. So now, are you going to be able to get the money back for all of those things? It depends. There's 3 possible scenarios. Best case scenario, yes, they give you your money back. I will say that's probably pretty unlikely. Middle case scenario, they don't give you your money back, but both the airline and the cruise line will give you credit. They'll give you credit to use on a future flight. They'll give you credit to use on a future cruise. Worst case scenario, you're out all that money. You lose all the money you paid for the cruise. You lose all the money you paid for your airfare. You don't get any of it back. The second possible scenario, you're at the cruise port and you're going on one of the cruise lines that you have to be tested at the cruise port. Now, I made an entire video about this and I'm going to refer you to that video up here. The thing that I found so alarming when I made that video was that the cruise line representatives I talked to on the phone, they didn't know. They didn't know what happens to you when you test positive at the cruise port. Now, in that video, I talked about how people who live nearby, like in Florida, or like Jen LaForge lives in Georgia, which is only one state away, may have the ability to just drive home, especially if you came in your own car. If you came in your own car, I really do believe if you test positive at the cruise port, they will let you get back in your car and drive home. I do question, though, whether Jen LaForge's backup plan to go rent a car and drive home, if they would have let her do that or not. I'm really not sure. So I really couldn't get very good specific answers out of the cruise lines, but I really would like to reach out to you. If you or someone you know, because I'm sure it happens, because people get denied boarding all the time for testing positive at the cruise port. If you or someone you know was denied boarding for someone in your traveling party testing positive at the cruise port, what happened next? If you've had this experience or you know someone who has, please share that in the comments below. Because from what I found out when I made that video, if you had the insurance through the cruise line, you'd be okay. The cruise line would take care of you and cover the expense of either flying you home privately or quarantining you in a nearby hotel or whatever. But it would be on them if you bought the cruise through the cruise line, and you would either get your money back for the cruise or get a future cruise credit. But you would be out the amount of money you had spent, like to fly down there, for example. And if you had spent a night in a hotel the night before you got to the cruise port, you spent that money. If you didn't have insurance that would cover COVID and you were forced, because you tested positive at the cruise port, to quarantine for 10 days or 14 days or whatever in a nearby hotel, you and your family. And even if you do have travel insurance that covers COVID, you have to pay all of that yourself up front. You have to pay for the hotel stay, which could be thousands of dollars. You have to pay for all your meals and somehow have them delivered to the hotel or whatever, if they don't have that figured out. You have to pay all of that up front, and then the travel insurance company only reimburses you afterwards. So that is the reason that our family has not wanted to take that risk of getting tested at the cruise port, because if we tested positive, any of us, that would be the situation we would be in. And I don't have an extra emergency pile of money set aside for, just in case one of us tests positive and I have to pay $4,000 now for us to stay 2 weeks in a hotel and have food delivered. Okay, so if you don't have that pile of money like I don't, you don't want to find yourself in that situation either. That's the bummer thing about travel insurance. Travel insurance in many cases does not pay for it up front for you. You still have to pay for the emergency situation or the medical or whatever it is up front. The travel insurance only reimburses you after. So I know that's not a familiar concept to most people, because when you make a claim on like your homeowner's insurance, or you make a claim for a repair on your car, they usually pay the vendor directly. The homeowner's insurance or the car insurance, you get quotes from a mechanic and you submit it to them and they agree, and then they pay the mechanic to fix your car. And you don't have to worry about paying for that up front. It's not the same with travel insurance. It's a lot more like some health insurance. Like sometimes health insurance will cover so much of the bill and you have to pay the rest, like of your doctor or hospital bill. And sometimes some things, like, for example, certain medical equipment or supplies, you might have to buy it up front, but then you've got to submit the receipt to your health insurance company and then they'll reimburse you. It's more like that. Third scenario, you test positive while you were on a cruise ship. Maybe somebody else tested positive on the cruise ship. Maybe you got sick and you presented yourself to the health center and they tested you and you're positive. Tony from Lolita Loca made an excellent video telling the story of a couple that was actually featured in an article in USA Today. And I will link Tony's video up here to explain all of that to you. Basically, this is actually probably the most worry-free scenario. If you test positive while you're physically on a cruise ship, the cruise ship is going to completely cover that. And I think that's true for almost every cruise line. And the reason for that is they are kind of accepting responsibility. Even if you had the virus when you got on the ship, maybe your test you took at home 2 days before you got there, you hadn't contracted it yet. You contracted it between there and the ship. Or maybe you had the virus in your body, but it wasn't enough for the test to detect it yet. That's possible. And you actually brought the virus onto the ship. They recognize that that's a possibility, but they're still going to cover it because they don't want to get sued by people saying, I caught the virus on their ship. So even though they don't know when or where you caught the virus, they're just going under the assumption of saying, okay, you caught the virus on our cruise, on our ship, and so we're going to cover everything for you. We're going to fly you home at our expense in a private jet and all of that. We're going to quarantine you, take care of you. They cover all of it. So that's actually probably the best case scenario of these 4 scenarios that I'm presenting to you. If you test positive on a ship, even though it sucks now you have COVID and your cruise is ruined because you don't get to do anything after that. They're going to get you off that ship as quickly as possible. The cruise line is going to cover it. Okay. 4th scenario. You have traveled to another country internationally. And this is assuming this is for Americans, although this is true in a lot of other countries as well. To get back into the United States, if you have left the country, you must, as of the time of filming this, present a negative COVID test when you board your flight that was taken no more than 1 day before your flight back to the United States. So that means if I'm flying back to the United States on Saturday, I have to have taken the COVID test on Saturday before my flight or on Friday. You can't take it any farther ahead than that. Now, one simple solution to this is most major airports now offer COVID testing. One negative of this, and this is the big gotcha with testing for travel. If you're in a situation where you can't get access to an economical home test, one of those proctored tests that you can do at home. And by the way, you could buy some of those ahead of time and take them with you. Those proctored home tests that you connect over the internet and somebody observes you taking the test yourself. You can do those in your hotel in Rome and still use that as your test to get you back home again. That's probably your cheapest option, because something else that's an expense that I don't think people think about is you have to pay for testing for travel. Say you need to go somewhere in the country where you're visiting and get a test, or say you need to get a test at the airport. Those tests can vary in price a lot. They can range anywhere from, $25 to $250. Well, if you got a family of 4 people, that's $1,000 just for the test. And if one of you tests positive and there's concern that it could be a false positive, and then you have to pay for another test. So just the testing itself, whether you need to go somewhere and pay for a test when you're traveling, an airport, a pharmacy, whatever, or if you need to buy at-home tests, which at the time I'm filming this are almost impossible to get in the United States. President Biden has announced that in January, which is when this video is going to go up, they are going to start offering free tests that people can call or go to a website and order, but that's not available yet at the time I'm filming this video. But right now, I'm filming this just before Christmas in 2021, and lots of people are trying to get at-home tests to test themselves before, they get together with their families for Christmas and everything. And pharmacies are overwhelmed, and there's no at-home tests to be found. Like, there's a real shortage. So that's a continuing, ongoing problem in the United States, whereas in some other countries, like in Great Britain, they mailed free tests to everyone in the entire country. And my understanding is they mail them multiple tests every week, and say they want everybody to keep testing themselves constantly. And I don't know how effective it's been, but it's a completely different thing in the United States. And it's understandable. The United States is just so huge and it has so many people. So, but okay, you're in another country, you're in France or whatever, and you take a test either at the airport or at a pharmacy, or you took the proctored test that you brought with you in your hotel and it's positive. They're not going to let you on the airplane, okay? You're stuck in France. You're stuck in France or whatever country it is, and depending on the country, you are stuck there until you either meet that country's health department's requirement for how long you have to isolate. You're going to have to isolate in a hotel or wherever that country says you have to isolate at your own expense for however many days they tell you have to. Now, for some countries, it's a fixed number, 10 days, 14 days, 21 days, or it's until you test negative. They're going to make you keep testing until you test negative, and then you'll be able to leave and go home. But again, that's when you're going to need that emergency pile of money that you have over here that you hopefully set aside and budgeted ahead or happen to have. I can't afford that. I have to save up and scrimp and save and shave off money here and there for so long just to be able to travel at all now, that if I had to have the emergency pile of money just in case one of us tests positive, I'm in trouble, okay? I don't have that much. So I've told the kids, as long as testing is a requirement for cruising or for international travel, and we might face one of these 4 scenarios that I just described to you, the only way that we're going to be able to do... Now, there might be a way we can take a cruise. If we do one of the cruises where you don't have to be tested at the port, you have to be tested at home before you go, that's a possibility. We might be able to do that. But for the other scenarios that I said, where you're tested at the port or you have to be tested because you've traveled to another country and you have to be tested before you can come back, I am not in a position right now where I could afford the risk financially of doing that, because I would not have the money to pay for us to be isolated and quarantined in another faraway state or another country if one of us tests positive. So if you're not in that position either, you really need to recognize and think about that. Because no matter what, even if it came down to it, and the country's going to force you to quarantine somewhere or isolate somewhere, even if they covered initially, like I talked about in that video about what happens if you test positive at the cruise port, they're going to want their money back. They're going to bill you and come after you for that money. Even if you didn't have the money with you at the time to pay for it, they're going to make you do it anyway. I mean, they're not going to say, oh, you don't have the money? Okay, fine, you can get on the plane and go home. No. They're not going to say that. You're going to have to come up with that money somehow, whether it be now or later. So I've told the kids, until we can get to a financial place, and it's hard to say what's going to happen first. Will I be in a better financial position first, where I'll be able to save up a bunch of extra money? I've got an extra $5,000 in my savings account, and that's okay. It's hard to say if I would be in that position first, or if the pandemic will have progressed enough and things will have changed enough that there won't be these testing requirements anymore. I don't know which is going to happen first, honestly. They both seem like a far-off dream to me at this point. Now that you recognize all of the risks involved financially for traveling on a cruise, which is international travel, traveling internationally during the pandemic, I hope that this shines a light on this for you and gives you something to think about, because I think a lot of people have not thought about this. Let me talk to you about the issue of getting insurance for travel. So I've touched on this already, but like I said, most travel insurance does not cover pandemics. This is particularly problematic in the United States. In other countries, it's not the same. In the UK and even Canada, they can get COVID insurance, COVID travel insurance that covers COVID. Much easier than we can get it here in the United States. It's very difficult to find travel insurance companies that will cover COVID in the United States. And again, as I said, even if you can find a travel insurance policy that will cover COVID in the United States, they're not going to pay for the costs up front. You're going to have to pay for the costs up front, and they're going to reimburse you afterwards. So you need to keep that in mind. There is also one company, and the name escapes me right now, but I will put it down here at the bottom of the screen, that I just read about. That is a company that will evacuate you and return you home if you test positive or have COVID when you're in another country. The reason that's unique, like if you have a MedJet or you have evacuation coverage on your travel insurance, they won't evacuate you unless you're in the hospital. And for many, many people, especially those of us who are fully vaccinated and boosted and all that, you're not going to end up in the hospital. You might be very sick, but you're not going to be sick enough to go to the hospital. And so you're miserable in this hotel room sick, or you're asymptomatic and just stuck in this hotel room. You can't get home because you can't present a negative COVID test, but you really don't want to waste all this money and spend all this time in a hotel. You can go through that company and they will evacuate you and get you back home even if you aren't in the hospital. And that's the only company that I've seen that does this. But I looked at their rates, and for a family, for the three of us, just to have the insurance through them, to have the coverage, it's the same or more as that emergency pile of money I'd have to have. And that's just insurance. So that's just like, either way, I'm going to have to either pay up front or have the emergency pile of money in my savings account or something. But I guess my message to you is, you need to plan on having thousands of extra dollars if you are in one of these scenarios, especially if you've flown to a port city or you're in another country and you test positive. You need to have a lot of extra money with you, or some type of probably very expensive COVID travel insurance or evacuation coverage to get home, or to cover that time you have to isolate in that place. And if you don't, I would strongly advise you to rethink your plans to travel outside of the United States, or even to travel to a faraway distant state from where you live, if you're going to be tested at the cruise port. So that is my hopefully helpful advice to you about one of the biggest risks of traveling internationally during the pandemic that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about. Everybody is so focused on the getting sick aspect, which obviously is very serious in itself, and nobody's thinking about the financial implications of what would happen if you test positive when you're traveling internationally. So I hope that this was helpful to you, and I hope this gives you something to think about. And let me know if knowing this, having this knowledge and information has you rethinking plans or, concerned. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Safe travels.